Alex here from Downbeat Dance. So what I wanted to do today was just talk a little bit about blues dance and be able to talk about it in a way that's the most simple and relevant for someone who is a new dancer who's looking into blues dance as maybe something that they want to learn or just something that you want to understand. So probably, though not necessarily, if you're looking into blues dance, you're probably familiar with swing dancing already because a lot of the music has a good mix. Blues dance is part of the swing dancing family. Granted, it's in kind of the opposite end of the family than, say, something like Balboa, Bal Swing, but they're still a part of the same family, and a lot of the music intermixes, and a lot of people that enjoy swing dancing also enjoy blues dancing. You'll even see people doing blues dance to a lot of songs where some people are doing Lindy Hop, some people are doing blues dance, and there's just this nice mix, kind of similar. If you'd see some people doing Lindy Hop, you might see some other people doing some Bal to a faster song. So generally, though not necessarily, blues dance is going to be done to slower music. Though again, not necessarily. And I'm going to talk today about modern blues dance. So what we are doing today, what you see out on the dance floor today, as opposed to the historical blues dance. And modern blues dance, you'll see, comes from three different places. So the first place that we see modern blues dance come from, that I'm going to give, is West Coast swing. So there we have it. We got our first kind of sphere of influence, if you will, is West Coast swing. West Coast swing is actually derived from Lindy Hop. It's what happened when Lindy Hop became dance to some of the more up-tempo blues music that was around, and out of that, voila, West Coast swing was born. West Coast swing today is danced to a lot of pop music as well, but it didn't necessarily originate that way, and it's all good, not putting anything down, but West Coast swing definitely has its roots in blues, and its roots still stay there in blues. Now, a second area of blues dance that we have is what I like to call ballroom or smooth blues. And I'd like to clarify that what I'm doing here is not necessarily like some type of official historical record of blues dancing. So please don't email me and say, oh, you didn't factor in for the trunky-doo behind the back dance in Alabama, and that was not part of any of this. I'm basically trying to reduce this down in simplified terms, and of course there are going to be things that I leave out along the way. So if you want a long history, you should read a long history of it. But the next piece of blues dance that I have is ballroom or smooth blues. And this is blues dancing that originated from a lot of the places, the same places that swing dancing originated from. So like, for example, in the Savoy Ballroom in Harlem, the band would play a slower number and you would have people doing some ballroom blues dance to it. Now, because this is a dance that is African in its roots and comes from the African American community, even though it's ballroom blues, it's not going to be like very stiff and upright like a lot of ballroom dancing. It's still going to be entrenched in African principles of movement, the same principles of movement and aesthetic that we put into our swing dancing, but it also tends to have a little bit of elegance to it. So when people were dancing this style of blues, they're often dressed up. They often had an entire ballroom to use. A lot of times they would go around the floor, so on the outside of the dance floor you would have the people going usually counterclockwise around the floor. So it tended to travel and move a lot, and the music also reflected that. Now, the third part of blues dancing, and I'm going to use these today as kind of like my primary colors of blues dance, is what's called jukin blues. And jukin blues came out of the juke joints in the South. So a lot of the southern rural communities oftentimes had these very cheap kind of shack-like places in the middle of the country, oftentimes, where a lot of the poor blacks lived, where a lot of sharecroppers lived and worked, where actually a lot of like very hard-working people worked. And so like a lot of very hard-working people during the week work hard, not for a lot of money, and on the weekend really had to let off some steam. And so these juke joints provided that type of a venue for them to do so. So a lot of times these juke joints, I'm not even exactly sure how legal most of them were. They were oftentimes rural. You kind of had to be a little bit on the inside to know about it. They were open very, very late. Oftentimes the hours that these joints ran were something from like midnight to 6 in the morning. There was a lot of times music, and because of their kind of underground nature, they're oftentimes packed full. So very tight quarters, and oftentimes there's a lot of vice. So there's a lot of drinking. There's kind of like a lot of flirtation, sex, a lot of the things that kind of come out of that environment going on. So it was very primal, we'll say. So for juke and blues, you have the quality of it being primal. So oftentimes juke and music, and the music that was played in these juke joints, you would have music that's more intense, kind of music that gets more at like root animal and human desires and motivations. It's not always sex. Sometimes it may be like a revenge, like John Lee Hooker's Bad Like Jesse James is a song that I can think of like this. So not to be under the mistaken notion that juke and blues is always sexual in nature, it's not. It is oftentimes very primal in nature. And just to make a quick distinction, and I make these in my classes, but expressing something primal is very different than kind of acting on it. So there's a big difference between someone who is able to express a sexuality in a dance versus someone who is using the dance to get off. And the second one is creepy, it's inappropriate, and if you're in any kind of a dance scene at all, the elders in the scene will get on you right away and make your life very uncomfortable if you engage in that kind of activity. But that said, we are all human beings, we're all sexual beings. Expressing some hip movements, some sensual type movements is always in the ballpark, especially to juke and blues. So juke and blues is very primal. Ballroom blues, or smooth blues, is oftentimes very elegant. And West Coast swing blues is usually very smooth and fluid. So we have these three primary colors, kind of primary influences of modern blues dance. And again, this is not any kind of exact historical record. This is something that I just came up with on my own, so please, again, don't email me and tell me that I don't know anything about this. I might not know a lot about it compared to you, I don't know, but I've been studying this for a good 7-8 years, and this is the way that I've found that kind of simplifies things the most. It is simple, but gives you an idea of where the dancing is, where it comes from, where it's going. In reality, blues dance comes from hundreds of different dances fragmented throughout the last century, throughout the country in different areas, and it's conglomerated into this thing that we call modern blues dance. And this by all means does not cover everything, but it does cover quite a lot of what you'll see and deal with on the dance floor.